I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello, everyone. You are listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I am your host, Rachel Dalton, and I really needed that break. This episode was supposed to come out 2 weeks ago, but just life got really hectic. I went home to put together the episode and release it 2 weeks ago, and I found a stray dog on the side of the road that was starving. She was so sweet, and the shelters were closed, so I took her home, but she wouldn't get out of the car, so I slept in the car with her and then spent the entire next day driving around trying to figure out how to get her somewhere safe. So that happened, and then I ended up getting offered a role in a play at a little theater down the street from my house, and rehearsals started immediately, so I jumped right into that. It was a very crazy weekend, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to push this episode. I'm going to take a couple weeks off. And I was beating myself up about it, but then I was like, you know what? This is my fucking show, and I can do what I want. There are no rules. I make the rules. So, yeah. Today's guest is my dear friend, Anna Gonowan. She is actually our first repeat guest. But before we get to that, I wanted to touch on something really briefly. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos, and I was watching this one. It was about red flags in relationships, and I guess I'm just starting to think again about what really makes a good relationship. And there are lots of answers to that, right? I think we've talked about this on the show before, but I wanted to touch on it again because I think it's important to remember. And with a lot of people quiet quitting their relationships, actually former guest Dr. Martha Tara Lee released a newsletter about people quiet quitting relationships. Put it in the episode notes. With a lot of people quiet quitting relationships, I think it's important to keep an eye on this. So I'm really briefly going to touch on the 4 horsemen. And of course there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that's a takeoff of you get it. Anyway, the 4 horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. And the fact of the matter is, if you see any of these present in your relationship, you really should take a look at it. Because that's a bright red flag just waving and begging you to take a look at it. But yeah, let's kind of go through them a little bit. So we have criticism, which is different from, giving feedback. I think we all know that there can be positive criticism and negative criticism. But if you are being so critical of your partner to the point where you are saying more critical things than you are kind things, that's not great. Contempt, it's just being mean and dismissive. And I think this is the worst one. If I had to identify contempt, I mean, it's a lack of respect almost for you as a human being. And yeah, it's not, if you are starting to feel that way, if your partner is starting to treat you that way, please that goes for all of these. Please take a cold, hard look at that. Defensiveness, usually in response to criticism, and just being unwilling to try to meet you in the middle, to try to see your point of view, to hear you. And of course, we all get defensive sometimes. That just is part of being a human. But when we're in a relationship where we are invested and we care about the person, we try to work past that defensiveness so that we can work with our teammate to find a solution. Stonewalling is shutting your partner out completely when they make a bid to connect with you and you just shut them down. These are all painful. And I guess what I would say, I mean, I look back to all of my relationships, and the four horsemen are bringing news of the apocalypse, right? Just like these four horsemen are bringing, it's a red flag. If you see any of these, it's time to take a deeper look. Maybe talk with your partner about going to counseling. Maybe it's salvageable, maybe it's not. You're not going to know, but I think that having these tools and these words, being able to point to these words, and I mean, hopefully you're not identifying them in your partner, but being able to see them and point them out. It's really important, because I think that when things are starting to fall apart, we have a tendency to get really confused. So being aware of these four horsemen is, I think pretty important. And hopefully you don't have to deal with them, right? That's the dream. You know what is not a dream, though? See what I did there? The audio quality of my fucking microphone in this episode. I normally love hearing myself talk. I mean, it's why I have a podcast, obviously. But I hated editing this episode, and there was nothing that I can do. I tried so hard. I tried so many different ways to try to edit the sound so that it doesn't sound like I'm fucking underwater, but I couldn't do it. So we're stuck with it. I'll go back in and remaster it someday. But for now, I'm so sorry. I apologize for the shitty audio quality. I'm not sure if it was how I was recording or the settings of you don't care. Anyway, let's get into the episode. My friend Anna Gonowan and I are going to talk about demisexuality. You know, the last time that she was on the podcast, I think back in March, we talked, and the main topic was identity, but we didn't really touch on the fact that Anna identifies as demisexual. And I didn't really know much about it, but I started researching it in the spring and made some realizations that I really strongly identify with that. And like I say in this episode, who knows if I am, who knows if I'm not, but what I do know is that the questions that it has made me ask about myself and that I've asked other people, I have learned so much about myself just in the way that I am attracted or not attracted to people, and in the way that I feel emotionally or intellectually connected to other people. What is attraction, right? And so Anna and I talk about some of these things in the episode, and we even talk about some like sexy stuff a little bit. So, you know, stay tuned. I'm going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then please enjoy my conversation with my friend Anna Gonowan.
Broken, a tragic romance game by Apon Games, is a storytelling game of tragic romance for two players about broken objects and broken hearts. Together, you and your play partner will create two characters in a relationship, and over the course of 10 scenes, you will explore the ways in which the things you loved about each other crack, until everything about your relationship is broken, including 10 real-life physical objects you will break over the game's 10 scenes. In Broken, the relationship will always end. Although the tragic conclusion is inevitable, there is endless potential for healing and self-discovery along the way. Broken is an emotionally deep game that explores themes of memory, identity, and loss. Broken is also full of empathy building, hope, and healing. It recreates the raw, visceral experience of going through a breakup, along with the catharsis of smashing objects, all while telling a beautiful story along the way. Get your copy of the Broken ebook edition now by going to bit.ly/brokengame. That's bit.ly/brokengame or head to apongames.com, APON games.com today.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am super excited to have my guest here today. And you know what? This is our first repeat guest. So I have Anna back with me. Anna, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm hanging in there, just life gets harder as you age.
Yes.
Yeah, so you've been on the show before. I think we aired your episode in March, but give us a little bit of a refresher on who you are and what you do. And I know that you have some exciting news that you may or may not be able to share. But
I can share. So my name is Anna Gonowan. I am a certified trauma recovery coach and an ICF master certified coach. I have over 6,000 paid coaching hours over the past 3.5 years. And I've spoken to and advised tens of thousands in that time. If you include my other work in public relations, I've influenced and advised millions by this point. But in addition to an MBA focused on strategy and communications and a really long, successful corporate strategy history, I am one of the country's best PR people. And I have one of the highest, if not the highest, success rates in the world when it comes to romantic relationship coaching. In my life coaching practice, I focus on effectively communicating by addressing identity, trauma, self-love, and resilience, especially for the queer, BIPOC, and millennial and older communities. I'm writing a book right now on identity and trust, which will be published by Bloomberg Publishing in partnership with the Wall Street Journal.
Oh my gosh, so cool.
Yeah,
that's really big news. Really big news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, well, so the last time that we were on, we kind of talked about identity, we talked about sex, we kind of covered a whole range of things. But one of the things we didn't get to that I kind of was like, okay, this is something that I definitely want to have you back on for, is the subject of demisexuality.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it was actually my birthday. It was my 32nd birthday in May. And I was driving and I was just thinking about like how like people hook up with one another and how I'm not looking forward to getting back into the dating scene and everything. And then the word just came to me. Do you actually know what demisexual is, Rachel? And so I pulled up a podcast or a video on it. I don't remember what. And all the things that they were saying, I was just like, holy shit. Like this is me. And then I've kind of explored it a little bit. I don't know very much about it. I know that what I am learning that it's very much more of a spectrum than I thought it was. But the cool thing is that regardless of how I identify at the end of the day, it really has made me open up and learn about a lot about myself. So that's been a really cool, byproduct of learning about it. With all of that being said, what is demisexuality?
Well, in order to talk about demisexuality, we first need to talk about asexuality, which was recognized by Kinsey, Pomeroy, and Martin in 1948 in a study that they did. There was later a study in 2004 that investigated the associations between variables and self-reported lifelong lack of sexual attraction, and another one in 2012 that gave a history of early asexuality research. In 2001, however, the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network, which is, I believe, www.asexuality.org, was created. So according to another study that was done in 2015, it appeared in the Journal of Sex Research, asexuality is a relatively understudied phenomenon described as under-recognized sexual minority. So there's a lot of room to better understand this section of the queer community. And according to the Cleveland Clinic, demisexuality is a sexual orientation in which a person feels sexually attracted to someone only after they've developed a close emotional bond with them. So forming a bond doesn't guarantee that a person will feel sexual attraction, but the bond is needed before sexual activity is even possible. So, I mean, in a consensual sex, right? It sense.
Right.
So demisexuals can objectively identify someone as attractive. So, for example, I think Tom Hiddleston is a very physically attractive man. However, I feel no sexual desire for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's demisexuality, essentially.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things they were talking about, like, oh, like celebrity crushes, and I had a massive crush on Orlando Bloom
Mm-hmm.
when I was younger, and
Mm-hmm.
part of me is like, okay, maybe it was like hormones, maybe, but I also am starting to realize that I fall in love with characters in books and in
Mm.
movies and TV shows, and I think it's because I'm emotionally getting to know them.
Yeah.
It's so weird. It's
Yeah.
like it's been the weirdest thing to keep an eye on. Well, okay, so how did you kind of learn about demisexuality and kind of get into this journey to identify as such?
Yeah, I was really thinking about this on my drive up to North Carolina. I'm in North Carolina right now.
Huh?
And I realized that I didn't identify as demisexual until the past 5 or 6 years ago. I assumed that my lack of sexual desire for strangers, acquaintances, or even people that I just got along with was because I was picky and was always very busy with my career. However, as I think back on my childhood and onward, I suppose that I knew something was different about me sexually all along. Any crushes that I had were always on people with men, or males who sort of elicited this sort of emotional, like warm emotional response from me, because I got like had crushes on characters in books. I was the same way, and I would see people on the screen and make these associations and think, oh my gosh, and that is what would cause my crush, not necessarily that the person was attractive,
Yeah.
right?
And then a
Yeah.
person is even more attractive. Like you might have
Yeah.
thought that they were objectively attractive, but
Yeah.
then after you get to know them and even just a character that you're seeing on the screen, you're like, oh my God, I love this person. At least that's how
Right.
it was with me and Orly.
Yeah, I mean, thinking along those lines, I didn't mind that I grew up in a very conservative household, so I didn't mind that my parents were quite restrictive socially, and that my Catholic upbringing told me to wait until marriage before I had sex. So not having the same social life as the kids around me was, for the most part, a really good thing for me. But my attitude towards dating, sexual activity, and sexuality was challenged in college, and I remember to this day a conversation I had in my dorm room with a guy who questioned why I should wait until marriage for sex. And of course, because I want to is an acceptable answer. However, after that conversation, I asked myself whether I was using my religious beliefs to prop up a general lack of sexual attraction I felt for guys that I
Mm.
met. Then I met a guy who was in medical school at the time, was in college, and it was through my interactions with him that I felt that one, I could be sexual and enjoy it, and two, for me to feel that way, I had to feel really emotionally connected to him. So fast forward to today, I have had less than 7 sexual partners, and with the exception of 2, when I chose to experiment and see if my sexual desire really was dependent on how connected I felt to someone versus someone I found physically attractive only, but not any emotional connection to. They have been people that I felt a deep emotional and intellectual bond. So I never identified as asexual because I knew that I could feel sexual attraction and that I
Right.
really did enjoy sexual activity in the right circumstances. It just seemed that I could only feel sexual attraction if the connection was a specific type, deeply emotional. Then I came across an article. I can't remember. Was it in Jezebel or Cosmo? It was something like that, or Bust or Bitch. It was one of those. I can't remember, but that article talked about demisexuality. So I immediately took that article to my therapist and said, "I think I'm demisexual." And her response was, "Well, let's take a look and talk about it," which we did. And after some thought and discussion with her, I realized that I was demisexual. It just made sense.
And so this was like past college, this was past high school, past adolescence. Like you had already grown up and had different relationships with different people when you kind of realized it.
Hmm. And it
Wow.
all, if you think about it, if I mean, as I think about it, it all makes sense because physically, all of my partners or anyone I've dated or I felt that had a really strong, serious relationship with, none of them physically are the same.
Hmm.
Completely different. There's not there's no similarity in terms of height, weight, musculature, you know, eye color, hair color, nothing like that. But they all do have one thing in common, which is I felt very emotionally connected to them.
Ah.
Every one of them made me feel safe. and and wanted and loved completely.
Yeah. And that's, I don't know, that's kind of opens up like another question that I have about demisexuality. You know, the term I think has only really started coming up in pop culture more recently. But what I hear a lot is, well, isn't that just being picky? And I know you have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could call it being picky, but being particular is a choice. Being particular is a set of decisions we make for ourselves based on interests, values, and similar. Being demisexual is part of who you are, what you're born as. For example, I remember when I would go out to parties in college as a freshman, and I watched people around me get drunk and make out and hook up with people. So I thought maybe this is what I should do too. And I do this every once in a while, go and party, but I never felt compelled to hook up with anyone. And
Mhm.
however, all these kids around me were doing it. They felt this sexual attraction that I didn't seem to feel. And for a long time, I thought it was just because I was too worried about homework and studying, or maybe I wasn't a party person and just needed to meet someone while sober or in class or wherever else. But I just couldn't get to that same place. And I noticed that though, if I really got to know someone and felt that we had that we had great conversations and understood each other emotionally, I wanted to kiss him. Like I want to be physical with him. And I think that so that's really where the definition of emotional connection comes
Mhm.
in. It varies for people, but for me, emotional connection means a few things. It feels like home. It feels like we're both active and present in the relationship. We're both consistently and constantly kind and generous with one another. There's tons of trust. It feels like I never question how my partner feels about me or the relationship. The love is dependable, and, calm and creative. My partner is emotionally regulated, takes care of his mental health, is able to manage his triggers. He's secure and confident. He's highly verbal and introspective. So, assuming that my partner is those things, an emotional connection feels like a safe place for us to express ourselves. And that's really different from how dating tends to go right now, which is you meet someone and people associate feeling a spark with physical attraction. But for people who are demisexual, it is, I have to get to know you and we have to take it slow. And as I get to know you and feel that we aligned and that you understand me and that I understand you, and you're actually listening to me and you are not a crazy person, yeah, that's where attraction starts to grow. But demisexual people just don't feel it right away.
I was talking to some friends about this, and they were like, you don't get like a little bit horny when you see random people on the street that you think are hot, or like you don't get a little bit tingly, or you're like, ooh, like I'd love to like fuck them. I go, no, I'd like to get to know them, and then if I like them, maybe I'll fuck them.
Correct. I mean, that's demisexual. So I get, it is different from being picky because we make those decisions. We make those choices when we're picky. But when you're demisexual, you can't get around that. You can't will yourself to suddenly just say, "Yeah, I'm going to go have sex with that person right away."
And what happens if you do? I mean, you may not have had that experience.
I mean, I tried a couple of times.
Yeah.
Like I would go, I remember when I was, dating, I would go out, with, a couple of guys and objectively think, this guy is really attractive. I don't feel anything. I don't feel anything sexually for him, but I know in my mind that this is an attractive person. And I wonder what it'd be like to kiss him. And I mean, just being really plain spoken about it, I would go kiss these people, and would I be turned on? Would I get wet? No, because I didn't know anything about these people.
Yeah.
Like there was nothing thrilling about it. To me, it felt very weird. Like I remember in those two instances, it almost felt like an out of body experience where I was watching myself engage in behavior I really didn't want to do,
Right.
and I had this desire to just say, no, I don't want to do this. Like I do not want to do anything with you, much less be naked with you. Do I feel seen and heard by you
Yeah.
on an emotional level? And if so, then suddenly then maybe I can trust you and maybe I can depend on you, and that's very attractive.
So, how does one approach that in dating then? Like you said, there's a lot of, I mean, asking for myself, there is a lot of hookup culture right now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just, okay, we're going to meet on an app. We're going to maybe go on a date, maybe go on a couple dates, and hook up. How
Mhm.
do you go about telling a partner that, you know what, like, I don't want to do this unless I really feel like I have an emotional connection with you? And, how do you phrase that in a way so it doesn't sound like I'm not attracted to you? Um, and yeah, just how do you maneuver around that? Because some people, I mean, I guess it would weed people out, right? Like if
Mhm.
people are like sayonara, then you're like, oh, okay, good riddance.
I think in the current dating culture, the best way to address that is to be honestly upfront and straightforward. I am not looking to hook up. I am dating with the intention of having a long term committed relationship. And so, therefore, we're not hooking up at the end of this first date. I need at least a few dates to really figure out if I want to do that. I mean, you don't want. I mean, a lot of whether or not you say you're demisexual, that's up to you. But because it's still sort of new out there, if you say I'm demisexual, people be like, "What? What is that?" And then they want to argue with you. So it's just
Yeah,
easier to
it's a can of worms, I
yeah.
imagine.
So it's just easier to say, "This is what I'm looking for. I'm not hooking up on the first date. I actually want to go on a few dates before we get to that point."
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I mean, straightforward is always the best way, and that's kind of how I was thinking to approach it.
Mhm.
So it's good to have some confirmation on that.
Anyone who gets upset about that is not the person you want to date anyway.
Right, exactly. So weed them
Yeah.
out early
Hmm.
and often, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, what about so demisexuality is a spectrum, and it's actually on the same spectrum as asexuality.
Yes.
But there are different components that made me, when I was, having this conversation with myself, my identity crisis,
Hmm.
um, that I was like, well, I masturbate though. I watch porn.
Mm.
Like, does that mean that maybe I'm not? And then it's like, well, maybe not in that way. So, masturbation, porn, how do those things, and the crushing on somebody really hard?
Well, I mean, we talked about that earlier, right? You realize that the crushes you're having are based on some emotional connection you're building with that crush. And I'll just say from my point of view, when I first started masturbating, it was more of a mechanical exercise. I rarely did it. But after I had my first crushes and it was on my own, because I lived in such a small house, there's really no way I'm masturbating in my childhood home. Masturbation became amazing because I could think of my crush doing the things that I saw in porn. So if I was with someone that I felt really emotionally connected to, sexual activity was so good and it made masturbation amazing. So whatever I saw in yeah, anything that I saw in porn, I could imagine this person that I felt connected to doing the same things that I saw, and
Right.
I could get off. Yeah.
So that's like I watch this in a porn and I'm going to put it in my memory and then superimpose this person's face.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or superimpose the emotional connection that you feel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah.
That's interesting. And it's interesting you say that you kind of viewed it as a mechanical exercise at first. I think it's just a stress reliever for me. I don't
Yeah.
know that it's like being connected to my body at all. And so the most efficient way is to watch porn. Uh,
I think a lot of men would agree with you on that. Masturbation is a mechanical exercise. It's a stress reliever.
yeah, like if I'm stressed, I'm like, oh yeah, like I probably should just go do this. And it's not that I'm necessarily even horny. I just am
Yeah.
like, I'm a little stressed. I should go do this. And it's like, well, if I want to make myself horny, then I have to go through all these steps and it's going to take an hour and a half. If I watch porn, then I can just get it done and get on with my day.
Yeah, exactly. Or
So,
you could think back to some memory where you had a great sexual experience with an ex, and go through that, and the next thing you know, you're coming and everything's great.
Yeah. No, I feel like a lot of people, myself included, have lost the ability to use our imaginations. So that probably plays into this as well.
Yeah.
I could talk forever, and I actually want to get an expert on to talk about how the porn industry has affected people's sex lives.
I totally will listen to that. I want to
Yeah.
hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So I'll DM you some stuff that I've been looking at. Anyway, okay. So, like I was saying, demisexual is on. Wow, that was I'm doing a lot of tangents today. So sorry, but I'm remembering where I'm going back to. So
there's no reason to apologize. We're going on these tangents together.
It's a journey. It's about the journey, not the destination.
Just like demisexuality. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Okay, which leads perfectly into, it's a spectrum. It's part of the asexuality spectrum. What are the different, and I know because it's a spectrum, it's hard to be like, oh, like what are the different points? But like, how would you, if you were to walk somebody through the spectrum, what would that look like? How would you describe it?
The spectrum of demisexuality, I think that really it depends on how you define emotional connection. That's where to me that would be the first place that I would start. And I would consider asking yourself, at least 4 basic questions. So 1, if I see someone who I find physically attractive, can I also imagine myself being relatively immediately sexual with that person?
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Another I would ask is, when I feel sexual attraction, what is happening between me and that person as I feel that attraction? How long and how well do I know that person? Okay. Another is, if and when I masturbate, do I have to imagine a person that I feel emotionally close to? Or do I have to imagine that I have an emotional connection to a stranger? And then the 4th is suspending religious and social beliefs. All right. Can I imagine myself having a one-night stand or having a highly sexually charged experience with a stranger or a person I've known for only a very short time? So this goes back to what I was saying earlier about how do you define emotional connection or emotional intimacy? And I just went into sort of this long, sort of talk about what it means for me. And so you need to ask yourself, what does it mean to be emotionally connected to someone? And how do I know that I feel connected to someone? For me, when I was dating, I had to go on several dates. There would be times when I wouldn't have sex with a person for a couple of months before we actually did anything. And it was and of course there was kissing and stuff like that, but not actual sexual activity. I mean, I was a virgin until I was 27, 28.
Oh, wow.
So for me, it was really important to get to know another person, and I realized how I could fall in love with and feel sexual attraction to someone I never met, because I had a couple of online relationships. I used to write for a webzine, and one of the fellow writers for the zine, he and I got into this emotional and intellectual relationship where we would write these really long, beautiful emails to one another. And it became sexually charged over time just because of how emotionally connected, how vulnerable we were being with each other. We were sharing different experiences. We were talking about what we thought about. It was a really beautiful experience. And so that's when I really sort of clued in for myself. My sexuality is different from other people's.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, just, everything that you're saying, I'm like applying it to myself, of course, because that's the joys of hosting a podcast, is that you get to ask all the questions that you want to know about yourself.
But yes, demisexuality, there's a spectrum of it. And I think it really all comes down to, how do you define emotional connection? How do you understand that is what you are experiencing? and how do you feel intimate with someone? What needs to be in place? What do you expect of your partner? What do you expect of yourself? How is that occurring? For some people, they can develop emotional connections really quickly if they have a few deep conversations. Then they feel the attraction. There may be I feel like I'm on the other end or the slower end of that spectrum. So I
Okay.
really have to get to know you. I really feel that I have to feel that no matter what happens in our connection to each other, that you will always be in my corner because I would always be in yours.
Sex is such a vulnerable thing, especially for people who have vaginas. Like, you're
Yes.
allowing somebody inside of you.
Yeah.
Like, and like they could kill you at any moment.
Yeah.
I guess you could kill them too, but like in general, stereotypes, the
Mhm.
male sex tends to be bigger and stronger.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for men to be demisexual. I mean, it's more socially acceptable for men to be demisexual because, for you could say I'm just picky or um, I just want to get to know you. A lot of women would find that very attractive if you say that. But for a woman to turn around and say, I just want to get to know you, I need to take it slow. A lot of men tend to, especially in the current dating scene, tend to think they have a right to your body. And that if you say yes to a date or if you're talking to them, suddenly that you should be able to spread your legs and fuck them or let them fuck you.
Yeah, no, I think that is frustrating, and I think that that's why being upfront, like as early as possible, I think you're right. That is the way to go.
Yeah.
Some of the things that you're saying here about attraction has got me thinking about this thought that has kind of been popping into my head lately.
Mm.
I realize that emotional attraction, feeling emotionally connected, is important. But
Mm-hmm.
I think I also realized that, and these two things are separate, and that's what I realized, intellectual connection is also
Mm.
really important for me. And I think that in the past, I've had intellectual connection and confused that for emotional connection.
Ah. So what about so tell me what an intellectual connection, how is that different from an emotional connection?
Well, that's the thing. Like, you can be an intellectual person, but not be very good at being vulnerable. You can be an intellectual person and I don't know. I guess not being vulnerable is the big thing I'm thinking of.
Mm.
I just for me they're two totally different things. Intellectual connection is being able to talk about like politics, religion. We can banter, we can have debate,
Mm.
um, but that doesn't necessarily make me feel safe. It makes me feel really engaged and kind of turned on.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that just those interplay between because for me I think they are different sexual connection or sexual attraction and intellectual attraction. Like, what are your
I
thoughts
was
on that?
well, there's a group of people who are identified as that, and they're sapiosexuals, which is also part of the asexual variant, spectrum. So people who, no matter regardless of whether you align emotionally or in terms of values, if you feel intellectually stimulated by that person, it translates into sexual attraction. Mm. But I agree with you on that. For me, I part of my for me to have a deep emotional connection or to have emotional intimacy with someone, I need that my partner to be introspective and emotionally attuned to themselves and emotionally open to others. That requires a level of you have to be intelligent to be able to do that. You have to have you have to be verbally skilled in order to articulate your own emotional life. So for me, I have found that we could emotionally connect and you can be vulnerable, but I need for you to be smart.
Yeah, but for you, you think that for you, if it's emotional, if you're emotionally connected to them, smart just kind of goes hand in hand with that.
Yeah, to me, they go hand in hand. I mean, some of my exes, some are smarter than others. My husband, I believe, is the smartest of them all, but some have definitely not been as smart. And I'm not going to name him because I think if he ever heard this, he would be so offended. But I'm thinking of the person who was the least intellectual, had the was not as intellectually flexible as the others, or his capacity was not as much as the others. I still felt very much attracted to him because our emotional connection was really strong. He made me feel seen and heard, but he had what he did have trouble with was really understanding viewpoints outside of mine and his.
Okay. Yeah. No, I can see that. So even if you had shared, or I mean, did you ever like not have shared and he didn't care to understand?
I think, well, we were also an interracial couple. He
Okay.
was African American, so he would look at things from the perspective of an African American man, and I get that, but not acknowledge my point of view as a woman of color. But it would be my responsibility to always understand that the viewpoint for him as an African American man, as a black man, almost seemed to trump anything that I was experiencing, if that makes any
Right.
sense.
No,
Yeah.
it does. It totally does. And I see what you mean about intellectually flexible in that way.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
like for like thought experiments or play devil's advocate, just like,
Mhm.
let's explore this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking a lot about, like intellectual connection versus emotional, and I think they do go hand in hand. But I think I've been confusing them for a bit, and maybe going after people that are really smart but not that introspective.
I mean, I think part of the attraction for a demisexual is the introspective part. So
Right,
we need people who have pretty, large intellectual capacities, because to be introspective and to be verbal about it and to be able to share that with others and then understand and be able to process what another person is sharing with you, you've got to be a smart person.
absolutely. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, I see what you
And
mean.
right, and part of this also assumes that you have similar values. So let's just say I'm very liberal. So I had a really good friend. We had wonderful intellectual conversations and we were very good friends, but he was very conservative. Did I ever have the hots for him? The answer is no.
Right. No, it's so much more complicated. Yeah.
Yeah.
We wanna make things easy, and it's like, okay, there are more of these labels. I mean, say what you will about labels, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's so much more complicated. That there's so many factors that play into attraction.
Hmm.
Um, and it's really quite wild.
All right.
Well, kind of going along the idea of what is some push. You said earlier that if you go on a date and you use the word demisexual, that like some people might argue. What kind of pushback have you gotten? Because I know that there's a lot of talk about how real demisexuality is.
Yeah, the first one's always, huh? What's that?
Okay.
And then you explain, and then the one of the most common responses is, wasn't that just being picky?
Right. Okay.
Like, doesn't that just mean you have standards? And then you have to go through the whole thing of about choice and decision making, and how one's sexuality, it's not learned. You're born with it.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting too. I think I was reading about demisexuality, and somebody said, and I'm totally gonna fuck this up, but it's not. It's about how you're attracted, not who you're attracted to.
Correct.
And actually, I didn't butcher that as much as I thought. Good for me.
Well, I mean, that what you're saying actually brings up, when you're trying to figure out what's the relationship between demisexuality and in you know other parts of the queer community, right? I think you have to first figure out what it means for you to be intimate with someone. So just like you have to define what emotional connection means to you, you need to understand what it means to be intimate. Ask yourself, do I identify as the gender that you're born with, assigned at birth?
Hmm.
Do you have the capacity to actively and romantically love more than one person? Can you engage in healthy, serious relationships with more than one person? So we get into the area of polyamory right there.
Sure.
For whom do you feel attraction, romantic, sexual, and how would you classify the attraction? Is it intellectual? For the last one would be for you to feel intimate or attracted to someone. Have you noticed that the attraction occurs only in certain circumstances? So that's where we get into how you are attracted, and what your sexuality is. So there's who we have sexual feelings for. So we hit you know people who are bisexual, lesbian, gay, and then we get into trans, versus cis, right? We get into hetero versus homo, and then we get into like how are we attracted and what are the not the barriers, but what needs to be in place for us to feel attraction. You address all parts of, I think, sexuality or love.
Yeah. Okay. Those are
Yeah.
really good questions. I feel
Yeah.
like I'm going to re-listen to this and write some of those down so I can continue to blow my mind over all of this. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like people would want to argue and talk about all of those different points specifically around isn't that just being picky or having standards? And I think, yeah, that's difficult.
Well, I
Okay.
think the answer is overall. I mean, yes, I'm picky and have standards. Of course, but that has nothing to do with the fact that I don't feel sexual attraction unless I feel emotionally intimate with you.
Right. Yeah, I do. I mean, and I'm using this word in quotations. Do normal, quote unquote, people like really just walk around, see an attractive person on the street, and immediately think, "Oh, I'd fuck him."
I mean, apparently they do. I mean, I don't. I don't. It's hard for me to imagine, but apparently they do. I mean, if we
Yeah.
were to take my college, my college experience as an example, apparently there are thousands and thousands of people who do that, and I was one of just a handful of people who was like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I was
So
like that too.
yeah,
That explains a lot about my freshman year. And it explains too, like I had so much self-control. And people always say that they're like, wow, like you have so much self-control. When it comes to, they're like, if I like was going out with that person that you went out with, like I wouldn't be able to control myself.
maybe, but the thing is, if you're emotionally intimate with that person, you'd probably be going at it, all day, all night.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
the what you need to have in place in order to feel sexual attraction doesn't mean you aren't a very highly sexual being. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. You and I are both highly sexual beings.
Yes.
Yes, but so when we're in relationships where we feel emotionally connected, it's like, yeah, let's do all this stuff. Like, I want to hang upside down from the chandeliers and like, twist me up like a pretzel. Let's go do that.
Yep,
Right?
because you feel safe. There's lots of
Yeah,
different you can do to explore when you feel
you
safe.
are a highly sexual being, but it's a journey to get there.
Absolutely. And that explains too, like in relationships, I've noticed it all my relationships when things start to go downhill, I can always track it because I just like kind of just don't want to have sex anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, it's because like I'm not emotionally connected to them.
Yeah.
Like something's wrong.
Right. In my own marriage, like we were talking about how I was experiencing a down period before this, like a depression, and I noticed that in that depression over the summer, I was feeling my sexual desire has just gone downhill.
Yeah,
You
which
know,
can
my
happen.
yeah, and my husband was working a lot, so I didn't feel as connected to him. So we weren't having sex as often. But as I have come out of the depression and we're reconnecting and his workload is getting better, we are having a lot more sex, like as usual.
Yeah. No, it's fun. And so there can be ebb and flows even with your partner.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
do you find that just like sometimes if you go on like a really fantastic date where, the two of you are just totally connecting emotionally and intellectually, like over dinner, that you just are like, we can skip dessert. I want to go right home.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean,
it
and
can
that has
really be
happened.
that fast.
It can. It can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you always hear about like in marriage, like the ups and downs, the peaks and valleys of how sex works. But I guess for people who identify as demisexual, those peaks and valleys, you can, I don't know, it just might be a little bit easier to identify them and figure out how to fix them. I mean, just sit down and talk to me.
I mean, long-term, successful, healthy relationships are a lot of work.
Yeah.
And to make them work, you have to be able to communicate well. And there are going to be times where you're not communicating well. And if you are demisexual, that will often translate into not a low libido, but you're just like, I'm not feeling the attraction right now. Oh, that's a sign that we're not connecting.
Yeah. It's a little like clue-in, which I guess it's like one of the few things I'm like, oh, this might actually be easier.
Yeah.
little clue-in. Okay, so in the last episode, we talked about identity, and we kind of just touched on the fact that demisexuality is about how you're attracted versus who you're attracted to. But for you, like, getting a little more personal, how does demisexuality play into your life and into your overall identity? Like, if you have any like stories from the past for how you've just had experiences that were a little bit different, and now, I mean, you just gave a great example in terms of like sex with your husband. How does that impact your life on like a day-to-day basis, and how does it shape your overall identity?
Well, now that I identify as demisexual and I understand what emotional connection means to me, I've become acutely aware of the emotional connections I develop with men because I'm attracted to men. Okay. And so I have to watch how close I get emotionally to any one person, because we could get into the area of polyamory if we do that. And you don't want to start crushing or developing feelings for a person who may not be open to the idea, or who would find that repugnant in general. So so for me, and I tend to be a pretty flirtatious person, so I'm just hyper aware of how closely I'm building my connections with men, in general. I mean, and I feel that I connect with people emotionally anyway pretty easily. I just have to be careful when it's with guys, especially who are in my age range, 40 plus, because you can be demisexual and, for example, bisexual at the same time, or you can be demisexual and polyamorous at the same time. So polyamory is by definition the ability to romantically love more than one person. It's also known as ethical non-monogamy. So, if you're demisexual and you're polyamorous, you have this ability to love more than one person, but the sexual attraction you feel for your partners is attached to the existence of a deep emotional connection between you and your partners. So in a way, demisexuality makes polyamory a bit more difficult to achieve, assuming you want to be sexually active with each partner. So I think traditional relationships rely on a heavy dose of sexual attraction to exist at the relationship's start. And this attraction goes hand in hand with the infatuation that one feels at the beginning. When you're demisexual, you're infatuated with the emotional possibilities of the person. And if the emotional possibilities become reality, then the sexual attraction grows. At least that's been my experience of that.
That makes complete sense. And it is part of the queer community, which I guess I didn't get, but if it's on the asexuality spectrum, then that makes sense.
You're welcome to the queer community.
I know, and that's I think you said that to me when we were talking like via Messenger, and I was like, oh, I like never thought to identify myself and there's nothing wrong with it, obviously. It's just for me, the way that I am, I never thought was under that umbrella, but it's just like, oh, maybe it is. So that's really interesting. What was the moment that you was there like a light bulb moment where you were just like, oh fuck, kind of like I had in my car?
Well, it's when I read that article, right?
Okay.
And I thought, oh, it just hit me, like, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, I think this is me. Am I demisexual? And then I had this, and then what flashed through my mind, all the different times when I thought, oh, maybe I'm just not like everyone else. or maybe it was just religion, because I'm Catholic, I need to wait, or I'm just really very picky. As I stripped away religious and other social beliefs, I realized that my sexual attraction was dependent on the existence of an emotional connection, as defined in a particular way, and I had no choice over it. I mean, I couldn't, when I've tried to have relationships with people that include a sexual component sooner rather than later, those relationships just did not work out because I did not feel comfortable at all.
Yeah, and you can't grow in a relationship if you're made to feel uncomfortable, like from the
Right.
get-go. It's
Right.
difficult to backtrack from there. It's possible, I guess, but it's difficult
Mhm.
to backtrack.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So this is kind of going back to the topic that
Okay.
we have discussed, like you said, in depth, which is wanting to try new things with a sexual partner, wanting to be adventurous,
Mm.
but you have to have that connection first.
Yeah.
So when you do have a connection like that,
Uh-huh.
like how soon into that bond do you feel like you're able to explore some of those things? And if you
I
want to
mean,
talk about what some of those things
pretty
are.
right away. For me, like almost immediately.
Really? Okay.
Once that's established, I'm ready to go. Like, I want to do all the things, like, all the time, like, immediately.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Like, when I first started dating my husband, when we first started dating, I mean, we explored sex clubs, for example, and I
Wow.
always wanted to
How
do
early
that.
was that?
It was how early into our relationship did we do that?
Well, how early into the relationship and how early
Um,
into when you started feeling emotionally safe with him? So I guess
I
I'm
started
asking how
feeling.
long it took to feel emotionally safe, and then I'm also asking, yeah.
So I started feeling emotionally safe with him, pretty quickly. Like, I would say month one,
Okay.
the first month, because we were having so many conversations. We were talking every day, almost all day, about all kinds of things, but from silly to serious. And I felt like we really understood each other, and it just really was a turn on for me. Like, I felt so attuned to him. I felt like we were so attuned to each other that when we were together, like, we explored a lot of stuff together. So we went into sex clubs like maybe within the first 6 months of our relationship,
Oh,
and
wow.
just yeah, we were just like checking them all out and trying different things. We would have lots of sex in public. We would, I mean, all kinds of stuff. Sex in public, sex in the park, sex in the car, sex outside. Like, there were so many times when I had mosquito bites all in areas that there should not be mosquito bites.
Oh, gosh. I can't imagine.
Because in the southern summer, like, we were outside all the time. Like, get we'd have this notion of like being get turned on, and then we would just start having sex, or he would pull over and we would just like go at it. And it was pretty full on, and for hours.
Wow. How did you,
Yeah.
like, work or do anything? Like, anything other than that?
Well, it's when we were visiting, so we were on vacation. But when we were,
Oh, okay.
yeah, but when we were working, I mean, I remember there would be times when I would be on conference calls for clients, not coaching clients, so I don't want to scare anyone. But like for clients, and or he would be on a call, for work, and we would be having sex at the same time.
I think that sounds fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm not
And
going
with
to do it for my
mhm.
employer. I'm not going to do it, but that sounds really cool.
Probably
I would
not
have done
wise.
it. I wouldn't have done it. Maybe I would have. I don't know. You'll never know.
You'll never know.
You'll
But I
never
mean,
know.
it is quite thrilling to have to be able to carry a conversation with a client or your manager or whoever, while at the same time, being eaten out,
Yeah.
or when you're writing someone. And in the sex club thing, we had a lot of conversations about what our own personal rules were around being in a sex club.
And I
And
think that's important too.
yeah.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. Like, what are, because I mean, technically, like, I was just talking to somebody about this. It'll be an episode. I don't know if it'll air before or after this, but
Mm.
the term monogamish.
Mm.
And so, like, if you go to a sex club or you go to a sex party, I guess they're the same thing, or you
Yeah.
swing, that's what I was thinking
Yeah, if
of.
you're swinging.
Or you have a threesome, or, you, whatever it might be, that's
Mhm.
technically not monogamy because you're
Yeah,
involving other people.
it's not. I mean, I remember my husband and I thinking about trying to do a threesome, but it was really difficult for us to have a threesome. We never ended up having one because I told him, because remember, I'm demisexual.
Right,
So I said, well, okay, one, if we're going to do this, I want to be someone that I feel like I really like as a person.
right.
And which mean, and if we're going to do this, we have to be able to do this fairly regularly, because I'm not going to spend all this time to get to know someone and feel connected to them just to fuck them once.
Yeah, it feels like that would actually be kind of heartbreaking for somebody who's demisexual.
Yeah. So we tried to find someone, and we just couldn't find a person who could really be attuned to me. Like
Mm,
honestly, they just weren't smart enough, and they were just so horny. They just wanted to be in a threesome. I'm like, no, I want to get to know you. Can we not have dinner? Like, can we have dinner first, or like meet up for lunch? Like, I don't want to make out with you. I want to get to know you as a person and feel like I
I
like
don't
you.
know you.
Yeah, I don't know you. How do I know? Like, I don't know you yet. I don't even know if I want you to kiss me. Like, why would I like let you stick your cock in my ass until I like know anything about you? So it was our attempts to have a threesome failed. But when we would go to sex clubs, our rules were, when it comes to sexual penetration, it's only each other. But we don't mind being watched, we don't mind people touching, we don't mind other people with their partner engaging with their partner as we do it, sort of, side by side.
Right,
um,
right.
we don't mind kissing, that's okay, but basically when it came to penetration, it's a no.
Okay. And so I guess that leads to the question, like, I think for me,
Hmm.
well, maybe not. Depends on how horny I am, quite honestly.
Hmm.
Yeah, maybe this doesn't apply. But I was just thinking, like, I don't know how comfortable I'd even be with people like touching me or kissing me.
Yeah.
And I guess that's just, again, part of that spectrum. But I also can understand, again, we were talking about how sex is so vulnerable for people who have
Hmm.
vaginas.
Hmm.
And it makes complete sense to me that you would be like, no, my husband is the only person who is
Yeah,
going to do that.
that we're going to do that. And if you let them, there'll be all kinds of people lining up to have sex with you.
Yeah,
So to me, that would feel weird. And I realized for myself, like the thought of doing it, of having sex with another person, with my husband present, I realized I need to actually be drunk, because there was something
yeah,
inside of me that didn't feel right about it. So
yeah.
to me, that was a clue that I was not okay with this, and I need to have really strong boundaries around it. And I needed to honor myself and protect myself by saying, I'm not going to do it that way. If I want to do this, I want to do this while sober, and it needs to happen in this particular way. I'm okay with touching, I'm okay with kissing, but I do not want someone else other than you doing oral on me, as an example.
Right, right. No, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of, I mean, I kind of feel like we've kind of done it here,
Mm.
but I wish that there were like some exercises that people could do if they're exploring demisexuality. I mean, so we've kind of covered you have to figure out what emotional attraction means to you.
Hmm.
And I think that's probably like the number one biggest question.
Yeah.
Um, but like takeaways from today, what are some other big components that you think people should be asking themselves if they are wondering, if maybe if you're listening to this and you're like, holy shit, this is me. What are some questions they can ask themselves?
I mean, just really sit down. I mean, just think about your sexual experiences, and think about the ones where you felt the most comfortable and examine that. What made me comfortable about this? Did I know the person for a long time? Was I, I keep going back to were you drunk or high, but really, were you drunk
No,
or
that
high?
matters. Yeah.
Yeah, because honestly, you do not want to be high or drunk when you are having sex. And if you need to be drunk or high in order to have sex, that is a signal that it is not that you're going about your sexual activity in a way that's possibly uncomfortable for you.
Yeah, not honoring yourself, like you were saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Oh,
that makes
and
sense.
ask yourself, if I believe that the reason why I am engaging or not engaging in sexual activity is due to some religious belief or social belief, try your best to suspend that just for a few minutes and say, what do I need as a sexual being?
Okay. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
those are really good questions, and I'll put them in the episode notes for people who want to write them down, maybe journal about them
great.
um, when I listen back. And that's really why I always have loved talking to you, is because you're very much like me, where you're like, okay, emotions are good. It's important to feel emotions. Let's examine the emotions.
Yes. Yeah,
Like,
you really should
let's look
examine
at
the
it.
emotions. Yeah. And ask yourself one clue regarding whether you're demisexual or not is what are some of the common things amongst all of your exes or the
Ah,
people
okay.
you've had crushes on? You know,
Yeah.
are there physical similarities? And how many physical similarities are there? In my case, there are none.
Yeah, there are definitely some of mine.
Right. And so if there is some, that's okay. But ask yourself, okay, so there's some physical similarities, but what else is common amongst all of them in the relationships where I felt the best?
Yeah.
Yeah, toss out the toxic ones,
Right. No, they
the
don't count.
negative ones.
They're
But
going to pull the equation down.
right. Just focus on the ones where you felt the best and the happiest, and say, okay, what was the same amongst them?
Yeah. Because I mean, there's this idea of like having a type, right? But being
Mhm.
demisexual is even more than that. It sounds like.
Yeah, your type as a demisexual. Yeah, your type as a demisexual person is like there's an emotional type.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because there might be a physical thing, and then it's like,
Mhm.
oh, so much criteria to get inside of me. I'm so sorry.
So honestly, isn't that being picky? Yes, it's being picky to the nth degree. It's like the pickiness is literally built into you.
Yeah, I kind of don't mind that.
I don't either. I mean, I think that's the way it should be, at least for me.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just I still can't get over that there are lots of people walking around who could say that person is so hot. I would go fuck them right now. Like I just
Yeah,
cannot.
no,
I don't
no.
see how that works.
It's funny. My mom was on the show to celebrate the 2 year anniversary, and she actually brought up demisexual. She's like, I think I might be demisexual, and she's like, term came up when I was teaching, and I was just like, oh, that sounds like me. She's like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I am or not, but I do know that I had really intense crushes, but that I absolutely had no interest. And she said the same thing. I was really focused on studying. I knew I wanted to go to college, like all of these things.
Hmm.
And then, like, her first and only sexual partner, to my knowledge, is my father.
Mm.
So it's interesting. I was like, look at you, mom, bringing out the terms.
Speaking of that, that makes me wonder if my own mother is demisexual. I remember her once.
Ooh,
Yeah, I remember her once telling me, "I don't understand what people talk about all the time with sex. Like, I don't think sex is all that special." And
okay.
all right, but if you think about my mother's relationship with my dad, they definitely were not emotionally connected.
Mm.
So I can imagine sex would be really not great.
Yeah, I can. If you have had like negative or not connected experiences with sex, I can totally see how you'd be like, "What's everybody's fucking obsession with this thing?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you talk to her openly about these things? I mean, is that like a conversation you could have?
Oh God, no, I cannot have.
No, okay. Still, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh wow, well, moms. Well, Anna, thank you so much for coming on the show again. It's been great to pick your brain and kind of just go over some questions that I've had mulling around in my head, and I guess concerns too. But hey, if you are listening to this and you are like, ooh, that actually sounds a lot like me, are there any recommended like readings that you would recommend or websites?
I think there's asexuality.org that I mentioned at the beginning, and I
Okay.
will send you. There was actually also an article in the in BBC.com. It's called "Why Demisexuality is as Real as Any Other Sexual Orientation."
Oh, I
I
think
will
I read
send,
that.
yeah. So I think that was a really good article, and that opened my eyes to a lot of stuff.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I
Well,
also think there's a website called thedemisexual.com.
I think you're right. I think I came across that, but I definitely was on asexuality.org, and they actually kind of break down the different, it's talking about the different phases of the spectrum. They kind of break it down there. So it's really, really fascinating. And hey, like, even if you're listening to this and you're like, I relate to some of that, maybe not to other pieces. I know for me that like having this conversation and asking myself these questions has made me realize so much about myself.
Yeah.
So, for that, that's pretty cool too. Well, yeah, any last pieces of advice or, inspirational quote that you want to share?
I don't know if I have an inspirational quote. I just want to say it's okay to be demisexual. I mean, every human being is unique in some way. Demisexuality is just one of them. And we should be accepting that people have different ways of living and being. So as long
Yeah.
as you accept that, demisexuality is no big deal, honestly.
Yeah. Well, Anna, thank you so much. I'm totally looking forward to reading your book when it does come out.
Great.
And excited for the opportunity for you. So I'll definitely have to mention it when it is published on the podcast.
Yes.
And give people
Yes.
a link. So
Yes.
but thank you for coming on, being vulnerable, sharing. And you have been listening to Wine, Dine, and 69. I'm here with my guest, Anna Gonowan. I'm your host, Rachel Dalton, and let's keep talking.